This first question, we're going to open the floor to talk just in general about laying the landscape of housing affordability in our community. I'd like to start first with Deronda. When you look at the landscape of housing and the affordability of it in our community, what are your greatest concerns?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you, YWCA, for having this conversation. I'm a native of Charlotte, and it's interesting because as I look out my window, my office is here in our shelter. So this is a community that, my dad drove me up and down the street, right, when I was a little girl. So when you talk about looking at the landscape and being a native of Charlotte, it's interesting to me because to see so many affordable units that no longer exist here in this city. And I often wonder, where are people living? How are people making it? And let me tell you, I am the first. I am a Panther fan. I am a Hornets fan. So I'm excited about all how our city has evolved. But from where I sit, very concerned about the affordability of housing. I always say to the people we serve, a big part of my job is making sure we can get people that are homeless in the shelter and making sure we can get people out. Both of those tasks are challenging every day. So I'll pause right there and give someone else an opportunity to speak to it and would love to jump back in on that subject more.
Thank you. Thanks, Deronda. We're going to jump to Stacy. Stacy, when you look at the landscape of housing affordability in our community, what concerns you the most?
Well, thank you for having us here today. Kind of what Deronda has said is there's definitely a concern about the inventory of permanent affordable housing here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. It has been decreasing and the need for it has continued to increase. I think what we've seen is that the rent cost burden for individuals in Charlotte, Mecklenburg has increased. Close to 47% of our individuals and families here are cost burdened in 2021. We're seeing that a lot of our naturally occurable affordable housing we're losing. And I'll make sure I say the right number. We lost approximately 36,000 low-cost rentals in Mecklenburg County between 2015 and 2020. I think what's really concerning or a challenge for us is not only the lack of affordable housing here, but also the rising rent amid the slow growth of revenue or salaries for the individuals that are living here. So I will also pause to let Julie add in.
That's awesome. Thank you. I see what you're talking about in neighborhoods all over the community. Julie, will you jump in and give us your thoughts on the landscape?
Yeah, everybody has said almost exactly what I was going to say. I mean, not only is our naturally occurring affordable housing, our older apartments and our single family homes, they're being purchased by investors, but we've got more people coming to Charlotte, which is further straining the supply side of housing generally, and just makes everything more expensive. If you're familiar with UNCC's State of Housing report, which is it was issued in the fall of last year, that report framed our affordability challenge almost solely on the lack of supply. And I'm sure we're going to get into it just a little bit more, but building a new supply of affordable housing has just never been more challenging. The other thing I just wanted to mention is kind of the people side of the equation and what we're seeing right now. We managed the city and the county's rental assistance program during COVID, and we're seeing emerging issues in other cities, and I can't think that Charlotte isn't very far behind, are the massive numbers of rent delinquencies. Those of us in affordable housing were super worried that the pandemics, like the lingering effects of the pandemic, are really resting heavily on low-income families, and they simply can't pay their rent, especially with the kind of increases they're experiencing, and they have no options. And I think it's just going to lead to more evictions. I'm quite worried right now.
I hear that. I hear that. Well, Stacy, if you could ground our participants in some data, if you could share a little bit about the community data on housing and homelessness in Charlotte Mecklenburg, what's it telling us about housing instability and homelessness, especially as it relates to communities that are significantly marginalized?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Well, as everyone here knows, that the lack of affordable housing contributes to both housing instability and homelessness. In Mecklenburg County, there is approximately a 27,000 unit gap of housing for individuals who earn 30% of AMI. The inventory that we have is continuing to decrease, which is what Julie has also stated. And this shortage contributes to the growing number of households that are experiencing this instability, that are experiencing homelessness. And it also means that the individuals who are experiencing homelessness are spending longer periods of time in the shelter. As of December 31st, 2022, there are approximately 2,664 people experiencing homelessness in Charlotte Mecklenburg. This includes about 853 people who are in families, 1,800 that are single adults, 104 who are unaccompanied youth, 242 veterans, and 527 people experiencing chronic homelessness. What we're seeing is that more people are entering into our homeless system. Our inflow is outpacing our outflow, getting people out of the shelter, like Deronda stated. And the median number of days to place people into housing is 193. And that has increased over the last several years. To Julie's point, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated already a pre-existing condition and problem here, and it disproportionately impacts minority and low-income households. People specifically who identify as Black, African-American, or African comprise 77% of our local homeless population, but comprise only 33% of our total population. Let me say that again. They comprise 77% of our local homeless population, while only comprising 33% of the total Mecklenburg County population. So this shows a significant overrepresentation in our homeless population. I do think that racial disparities in homelessness are due to several compounding factors. Primarily, there's persistent inequality, there's structural racism, and discriminatory practices and processes in housing and in criminal justice, child welfare, and educational systems. I think that homelessness by definition is a loss or lack of housing. So to put it simply, housing is therefore a primary way for us to solve homelessness. And although our number can seem large, it is something that I truly believe that our community can solve.
Stacy, those are sobering facts, and the disparities are very stark. It is, in fact, the women and the families that we served at the YWCA who were trying to leave our programs and go into permanent housing and had done all the work, repaired their eviction debt and utility debt, created savings, and still could not find affordable housing, that encouraged us to partner with DreamKey to use our property in a different way. But it doesn't feel like we can get the units online fast enough or preserve the naturally occurring affordable units that are disappearing fast enough. So Deronda, you've been working in housing and homelessness for over 30 years. I think you might have started when you were 10, right? Tell us about the most significant challenges that you're seeing now with the homeless population, and how are we collectively responding?
Yeah, so when I started working in homelessness, it was actually in 1990. I was a social work student, and we had public housing. And whether public housing was good or bad, we had the Fairview Homes in Earl Village and Piedmont Courts. It provided housing for a segment of our population that needed that type of housing. We also saw, as a result of public policy changing at the federal level and those housing budgets being cut, we saw a boom in family homelessness. Like when I first came, to have a mom come to the shelter with a baby, all the staff was holding the baby. Now we have hundreds of babies, right, in the shelter. So that has been a huge change. How we respond, once we start building public housing, we moved to the McKinney-Vento, and this was under the Reagan administration. And the thought was, instead of giving people free housing, let's do transitional housing and give them an opportunity to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And then we found out that transitional housing was so costly and we were targeting the wrong population. And we still had this population of people in the shelters that were stuck because there was no way out. And I told you, for the Salvation Army, we didn't do housing. And some people still don't know we do. We did shelter. We did transitional housing. Well, what happened is housing started coming on board in our community. A lot of the housing programs did not serve the people that we served in the shelters, because we serve people in the shelters that have an eviction, some that have a criminal record. One of the things I want to say, you know, Stacy, when you were talking about the data, that has been a huge shift. The racial disparity has always been there. That was probably our percentage in 1990, but we started talking about it. We started acknowledging it. So in order for us to solve a problem, we had to really talk about some real stuff like, why do we have these situations, right? And so I'm thankful that we're talking about racial disparities, what we do about it. Let's keep working hard at it. And so for that, I'm thankful. But I told you, you know, from looking at what we've been doing, we moved in 2011, during the Obama administration, we moved to more rapid rehousing, which was good. We moved to housing first, all was good. We've learned so many lessons, but we spent years, and we still do, housing people as quickly as possible, whether they have a job or not. But what we've learned over the past couple of years, and learned a lot during COVID, is that we need a little bit of it all. So we still do need some transitional housing. How I know is because I talk to the people that we serve. Every Tuesday, I have this meeting with the guests that we serve. And I mean, our dining room is packed for people that want to have a dialogue. And what I've learned from the people that we serve, which are families and women and men with children as well, that are homeless, is that we need supportive housing, we need rapid rehousing, and we also need transitional housing. So lots of lessons learned over the years. And I'm thankful to work in Charlotte and this community for people that are ready and willing to take a risk and do some different things. So thank you.
That's awesome, Deronda. Thank you. I think we want to remember to help everybody kind of have a similar definition about affordability. And traditionally, the idea would be that you would not spend more than 30% of your income on rent and utilities. And when you get beyond that percentage, you move into the phrase that Stacy talked about, being cost burdened. And certainly, you know, the greater the percentage, the more cost burdened you are. Julie, and we're going to use some terms like AMI, which I'd love for you to define. Tell us a little bit about how developers such as yourself and others are balancing what is just a continually growing higher cost of construction with the need to prioritize units for lower income residents, especially those residents who are at 30% of area median income and under.
Thanks, Kirsten. And first of all, thanks for having me also. And it is such a pleasure to be working with you on Grounds for Change. It's going to be a transformative project. But as to your question, I mean, there's just no easy answer. Over the last 3 years, construction costs have increased over 50%. And the problem is the resource side of that pays for building the affordable housing has not kept up. The $50 million Housing Trust Fund bond, I saw that there was a question in Q&A about where does that go? Well, it helps pay the gaps between the cost of building new affordable housing or acquiring existing affordable housing, and what basically you can have as debt so that you can still have people's rents be low. That housing bond is voted on every 2 years, but it doesn't go as far as it used to be, because now we're seeing, okay, we need double the amount of housing trust fund, which just means that you're going to have half the number of units that we're going to be able to support through that. What's more, and it's something that's not talked about much at all, is just the cost to maintain an existing unit of affordable housing has risen by similar amounts. So it costs almost $5,000 per year just to maintain a rental unit. Kirsten, you mentioned 30% AMI, and AMI stands for area median income, which is basically for a family of 4 in the Charlotte region, area median income is $92,400. So for people who are at 30%, families who are at 30% of that income level, their rent is quite low. You know, it may be sitting at $500 or $600, and that only brings in like $6,000 a year. So if you add in debt on top of that for the property, you simply can't maintain that level of affordability and keep the property in good shape. You know, unfortunately, it's kind of a math issue. It used to be we were able to easily develop a project at 60% of area median income and under. Almost all of our units were at 60% AMI and under. Anymore, you almost always have to have a balance of affordable rents and market rents to make the math work for new multifamily project. I'm really proud of the YWCA project because it is all 60% of area median income and under, but that just means we need extraordinary, you know, resources in order to complete that project. Anymore, if you're going to do a project like that, you have to have extraordinary subsidy and you have to have private grants to pay for those units beyond what we've come to expect just in government subsidies.
Thank you for queuing that up, Julie. I think we'd like to acknowledge the incredible support that we've had from private philanthropists in helping us to make this work, along with tax credits and affordable housing trust fund dollars and North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. While we're on that topic, I'm going to jump to the question about the role that local government plays in the affordable housing crisis, because I think we're already there now. Each of you, what's happening currently on the local level? What role does the local government play in the affordable housing crisis? And I know we're talking about both the city and the county at this point. Stacy, could I start with you?
Yes, and I'll actually focus on the county. I'm with Mecklenburg County. Well, what's the county's role? The county provides funding, leadership, and services in solving for housing instability and homelessness. For Mecklenburg County, it's really important to our board and our manager to ensure there's access and availability to affordable housing units for the residents in Mecklenburg County. And they've made this a top priority for the past few years. Our BOCC, our Board of County Commissioners priorities, as well as the county managers. Specifically, we provide funding. Mecklenburg County has had the opportunity to allot $39.3 million of our American Rescue Plan Act, our ARPA dollars, in 2 rounds. So $39.3 million is specifically addressing affordable housing development. In addition, 20 of those projects really focus on housing and homelessness, and also efforts to mitigate gentrification, senior housing, and workforce housing. In addition to the ARPA fundings, the American Rescue Plan funding, Mecklenburg County has also used $16.8 million in our FY23 budget for housing initiatives, specifically focusing on housing for the justice-involved population and the preservation of Pottstown, which is a historically Black neighborhood. We've also used dollars for ARPA to do a hotel conversion or converting it into permanent housing, specifically for homeless seniors age 55 plus to be able to live there permanently. So we provide funding. That is a key piece. We also do services. So we fund services for other agencies as well as within Mecklenburg County. Specifically, we focus on some of the lowest incomes. We provide and add capacity in programs like Away Home, Mac Home, Housing for Good for domestic violence involved families, Mac Fuse, and then of course our future senior housing opportunity we'll have. Lastly, we provide leadership. In addition, Mecklenburg County has led the effort to create an enduring structure that's responsible for implementing and sustaining the recommendations from our strategic framework called A Home for All. And we're specifically contracting with YWCA Central Carolinas to make this happen. We've also shown leadership along with the city of Charlotte in looking at policies. Late last year, both the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County passed ordinances making source of income discrimination illegal in Mecklenburg County. It allows us to have protections for any kind of development that Mecklenburg County or the city of Charlotte puts in that will be able to ensure that they are open to taking housing choice vouchers, rental subsidies from other programs. So in general, the county does several things, both funding, services, and leadership.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Stacy. Deronda, would you like to share from a service provider perspective what you see as the local government's role and what they're doing?
Yeah, and so I appreciate the question because when we were talking about all of the challenges, it felt a little hopeless. However, I did talk about I really appreciate the community that we work in, and I'll talk about the city and the county. I don't work for either one, but it feels like it some days because we partner together daily to address homelessness and affordable housing in our communities. So, and in particular during COVID, and I'll be sort of program specific. With the help of the city and county, we were able to purchase a hotel. And so we still have the shelter on Spratt Street, but we were able to purchase a hotel and serve 100 additional families, able to serve men with children, mom, dads with kids, and that is a huge win for our community, for our nation across the country. That's been a tough population to serve. Also, the city provides us with funding to help rehab the Center of Hope. The county provides us funding to help operate our shelters. So we work together doing a huge partnership during COVID. We strengthened that partnership with public health. And now, we have a space in the shelter with the support of public health that we were able to deal with COVID, and we're still dealing with COVID. We're having a good week right now, so I'm thankful. So on the service side, we do housing. And so not only do we put people in the rapid rehousing, we have about 200 families in subsidized housing, and the county provides funding so we can provide the support services. And I also want to just say about In Living, our housing authority, because we have 60 apartments in partnership with the housing authority that we are able to get some families out. So there is a lot of good things going on in Charlotte, although we do have some challenges, but thankful for what our local government does in our city for affordable housing and homelessness.
I loved that. I bet all three of you could say you sometimes feel that you work for the city or the county or both. And Julie, I know that you and your team work with both of our local government entities every day. In addition to what Stacy and Deronda have shared, what would you want to add?
I was just at the city council retreat. They had it on Monday and Tuesday of this week. They had a lot of priorities that they talked about. I think I was really pleased and gratified that they reaffirmed that affordable housing remains their top priority. They acknowledge that the resources they have to support it, the Housing Trust Fund, just doesn't go as far as it did 6 years ago. So they're just starting to talk about the fact that the city may want to increase that bond in 2 years. It was just voted on in 2022. Don't know what's going to happen there, but I'm really grateful that we have such an innovative city and a progressive city to realize that, we have got to put resources. If we're going to solve the problem, we've got to put resources to it. We are monitoring potential shifts in how that housing trust fund is spent, but that gets kind of into the weeds. And when I'm really encouraged that Mecklenburg County, they've really begun to support affordable housing in new ways, beyond their traditional roles in homeless prevention and services. They've supported new construction and acquisition of affordable housing now. And I think that that's a really nice shift. Kirsten, I would like to kind of just mention too, because we have so many folks who are on the call, I'm just going to put in a shameless plug for, we also do home ownership work, and we manage the city's down payment assistance program. And there's going to be an increase in the amount of down payment assistance that is available to people. Currently it's 30,000. If people live in the corridors of opportunity and they can go to the city of Charlotte and find the map, that is going to be going up to $80,000 in those particular areas. So they're making a huge dent in the amount of down payment assistance, just realizing that it's a challenge for people to purchase homes these days. You're on mute.
Thank you, Franz. That's my middle name during Zoom calls. You're on mute. I I appreciated Deronda's point about a lot of the conversation feeling hopeless. And while we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit about proposed solutions for the lack of housing for communities of marginalized individuals. And some of it might be dreaming aloud. It may be things that you see happening in other communities that we haven't started doing here. I know one of the questions in the chat was about, can local government do enough? And is it doing enough to prevent out-of-state investors from buying up properties and driving up costs for Charlotte residents? And unfortunately, to my knowledge, these investors are operating within legal parameters. And with the market being what it is, sellers are allowed to do that. But that would be, a dream. How can we stop that practice from happening? So I'll throw it back to the group. Any one of you can start. What would you see as a proposed solution for what we're experiencing now in our affordability crisis?
Well, from kind of just the affordable housing developer hat, I do think that we're going to have to have additional resources, and I don't think those can just be local. I think that, all of us are going to have to really call on our federal government to make some changes in the way affordable housing and housing generally is supported. Deronda mentioned public housing. I was talking to a reporter a couple of days ago, and he asked that very question. He said, aren't you getting, discouraged by the fact that you can't do more, or we seem to be losing ground? And then, you can't think that way. What you have to do is you have to sit there and say, okay, what would work? And so we're always creatively thinking, well, what if they doubled the amount of tax credits? Or what if public housing came back again? What if, there was government-owned housing again? What are the things that are the affordable housing of the future? Because we do realize that we can't just keep doing the same thing and losing housing in Charlotte or beyond. So I do think that there's things we need to do, but I also think it's going to take everybody at the table and saying, okay, how do we want to work on this problem? That's the great thing about Charlotte, is because nobody has to sit there and say, how am I going to do something? It's how are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it together?
Yeah, I would just add in to what Julia said, that I think that we are doing a lot of good things. We know that we have to increase the supply. We know that we need to slow the loss of NOAA, right? There's many things, and we're doing it. I think what we need to be able to do is to take it to scale, right? To have the additional funds and resources, whatever that might be, coming from other places too, from the federal government, from private investors, to be able to actually scale it to the need that we want. I mean, I think we've learned a lot, and especially during COVID, of what we can do. And I think the infusion of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars is something that I don't think I'll see again during my lifetime. And I think it provides us opportunities to invest more right now. And hopefully we're going to see some of those more positive outcomes in the years to come.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And so I think about the federal government slashing the HUD budget back in the 80s by 72%. That's huge. So a lot of it has to come from on the federal level. I think that our local government, I think they've really stepped up. I think they have really stepped up to because people care. Like I'm thankful for our county board, for our council, because they care about this issue in Charlotte. One of the things that I would like to see, and I'm trying to learn more about it, is rent control. I know that President Biden talked about it recently, and I read some of the pros and cons of rent control, but I would love to see that. I have to tell you, in the homeless world, I'm a social worker. One of the things that we've done, and Kirsten, you're probably familiar with this, is that sometimes we've tried to change behaviors by incentivizing, right? The people that we serve. No, maybe we incentivize the landlords to say, hey, don't increase those rents, so people can afford to live. It's really bad. Let me just say, we started rapid rehousing in 2011. What it took for us to house, I'm not kidding, 30 families. We can get 2 houses now. Like that's really huge. And so I don't know whether we do a plea to the landlord and say, hey, help us out. Or I wish that we could really do some type of policy changes to make it mandate, but I know it's some challenges with that. So that's a crisis though, the rental market. So if anybody's listening, please talk this up.
Deronda, you queued me up perfectly for the last question that we're going to ask before we open up for Q&A from our attendees. We're excited about that. How can our attendees engage with local policymakers on the issue of affordable housing? There's a multitude of ways. And Julie, having come fresh from the City Council retreat Monday night, perhaps you could start.
Absolutely. I think that there's quite a few different ways that people can engage. Most of our council and commissioners, they usually have town hall meetings, and that is the best place to go to have one-on-one conversations with your elected officials, because they're usually a little bit more relaxed. They're not in front of the cameras sometimes, and you can talk about the priorities. There's going to be a discussion next year about increasing the housing bond. That's the biggest tool we have in our toolbox right now to increase the supply of affordable housing. That's going to require everyone who supports affordable housing to weigh in and to talk to those elected officials about, this is an important topic. This is something that needs to be supported. And unfortunately, we're just at a point, an inflection point, where they're going to really have to talk about increasing it pretty dramatically. And if just one more thing on the county side, the county is stepping its toe, into the water on affordable housing. And they are some of the most innovative right now. They're really trying new things. So I do think that there's some opportunity there as you engage your commissioners and say, hey, this is a top priority, and they also have it as a top priority. So I do think that those conversations are just starting to happen as well.
Stacy, Deronda, your thoughts on how our attendees can engage with our policymakers?
Well, I think that Julie's idea of really talking with the council or the commissioners at town halls is one of the top things that I had thought about, right? Be able to have that engagement. I would follow them on social media. I'd reach out to them or to their staff to schedule a time to meet. Many of them are open to doing that, and then come not only with what your concern is, but perhaps some potential solutions. The county also is just kicking off our FY24 budget development. So in the next week, there'll be information going out where you can do a budgeting activity and you can prioritize where you think the county should spend our money. And they're going to collect that data, right? So to be able to see what people think are priorities in Mecklenburg County. They're also going to have different sessions in all 6 of the county commission districts, in person and virtually, for you to come ask questions and share what your priorities are for the next FY24 budget. I'd also suggest really educating yourself on this, because this is a complex issue. This is easy. We would have solved it a long time ago. And one source to be able to do that is we do have a housing and homelessness dashboard. And a lot of the statistics that I provided earlier are all from our system level performance measures and all the data that's on that dashboard. So I know that you guys can link to it. It's mecklenburghousingdata.org. You can find all of that. I would look at that. That's all our report series, all the housing instability and homelessness stuff. It's all there. So if there's anything that you need to understand, you can go there and start there before you go and talk with commissioners or council people. Also, to Deronda's fact, we also want not only local involvement, but even kind of advocating at the state level is also helpful.
Deronda?
Yeah, and that's the only thing I ditto everything that Stacy and Julie said. I was thinking about Stacy's point at the state level, this whole challenge with Medicaid and expanding and getting a Medicaid waiver for healthcare and mental health care would be great as well. So talking to your Senate, talking to the board. Also want to give a pitch for the Homeless Services Network Advocacy Committee. year round, they do advocacy efforts, whether it's advocating for the $50 million bond or just taking a stand for people in our community who passed away that were homeless. So I'll put that information in the chat.
Great, thank you. And Julie, if you could take this one just to help kind of, again, ground people in some basic understanding of tools we use often. One of the attendees had asked about not fully understanding how the Affordable Housing Trust Fund bonds work and how that money is dispersed. And I think, you know, you and I are working on that right now with our project, and it is a really critically important piece. But I think sometimes people may think it is like the majority of a project. So it might be helpful to hear how you've layered that into some of your projects.
Yeah, that's a great point. It does traditionally go to multifamily, but they have used it now for single family just because construction of single family homes, like let's say it costs $260,000 and you want to sell that home to a first time home buyer for $230,000. They have allowed some of the housing trust fund to just basically buy down the purchase price of that home. It can also go to things like, well, for the housing trust fund, that's all it can go to. It's just really to pay for some of the subsidy. On multifamily, there's so many sources that go into a multifamily project. You're going to see a third of the project, let's say, be paid for by federal tax credits. And then you're going to see another third of the project because it can be supported by debt. Just loans against the project. The rest has to have other solutions. So that's where we're seeking private grants, we're seeking federal grants, we're seeking, you know, financial institution support. But the biggest gap filler has been traditionally housing trust fund. And usually that's, you know, $2 to $3 million per project. So it's pretty significant amounts. I think what has happened in the last few years is that the gap is no longer $2 to $3 million, it's $6 to $7 million. And that's on a per project basis. So that is how housing trust fund goes into a project. It actually pays for hard costs of construction for affordable housing for the most part. It has also been used to help invest companies, including DreamKey, acquire existing apartment communities and keep them affordable for the people who live there. So like when we purchased Wendover Walk, which is right off of Wendover Road near Randolph, Housing Trust Fund actually helped us acquire that property. And then in return, we promised 30 years of affordability for people who earn less than 80% of area median income. Some of them are at 60% and some of them are at 30% of area median income. So there's a trade-off. It's kind of a trade-off between, okay, how much housing trust fund do you get and what levels of affordability are you providing to the people who live there? So we know that this stuff is complicated. Thankfully, I've got a staff who understands how all this works and how it gets put together. But the capital stack, just all the capital that goes to support a multifamily, there can be 10 or more sources of funding that will go to a project.
And that has certainly been true in regards to our project. One of our attendees had asked a question about the challenge that we're finding with getting landlords to accept Section 8 vouchers. And I think that just speaks to sort of the economy we're in right now, with landlords being able to name their price oftentimes, and the compensation for renting through the Section 8 program could be lower than what they want to get for their units. But Deronda, I'm sure you all have been doing a good bit of advocacy around helping shelter residents use their housing choice vouchers. And I wondered if you might be able to share any successes you've had with getting some landlords on board with Section 8.
Yeah, we have been able to get some on board, more than ever. However, we still need more. But one of the things that we're doing is that we are mediating with those landlords. To be honest, we do see income discrimination because most landlords, although people had a voucher, they want people to be working as well. So those are a little easier. And Kirsten, even on the back end, we see people that come into the shelter because they did not find housing with their voucher. And that's always so sad because once someone loses that affordable opportunity, that it's going to be difficult to climb back out of homelessness and start over again. So we're working with a housing collaborative to also help us find some units as well for those people that are in the homeless shelter. We have had some success with paying landlords, unfortunately, a lot of money, like double rental deposits, doing some negotiations through Housing Collab, putting up commitments for damages. So it's taken a lot. It's been a collaborative effort. I would like to say though, even in this tough time, our staff are moving more people out of the shelter into housing, which is pretty amazing. But we have a staff that are really committed and that are learning how to negotiate with landlords. And then when you work in a shelter and you have people right here at you, and you see the urgency to get out, you may move a little faster. So all of that is relevant. So.
Julie, you mentioned, and Stacy too, you mentioned the phrase NOAA earlier, and you were both kind to define it. It's naturally occurring affordable housing. One of our attendees commented on the fact that building new housing takes a long time. I mean, we announced our plans to build Park Roads campus in February of 2020, and we have yet to break ground. So it takes a long time to become available for people who need it right now. So what more can be done in our community to preserve the naturally occurring affordable housing properties so that they're not flipped and rented out of income reach?
Yeah, that's a challenge too. The single family homes are also being snapped up by investors right now. And as you pointed out, Kirsten, there's very little legally that you can do. I mean, if an investor comes in and says, I'm going to close in 30 days, and they're bringing cash to the table with an easy close, we're just not going to save that unit. It's just not going to happen. I do think that there's power right now in buying some of the investor portfolio. We just bought 30 single family homes from an investor that we're going to turn into affordable home ownership, hopefully to the renters who live there. But, just 30 homes was almost an $8 million purchase. So you really have to have the resources ready to go. That's the biggest thing. Do you have the resources, and are they readily available? Because things take time on like naturally occurring affordable housing. And if you can't close within 90 days, you're not going to be successful with that acquisition. And if you're promising, affordability with it, then you have to work through the city process to get a housing trust fund on a very fast basis. And also Mecklenburg County is also supporting NOAA purchases. So it is a timing issue, and it's an availability issue. And unfortunately, as much as most affordable housing is, it's a math issue. Doesn't work financially if you're going to be promising affordability for any length of time. That's the other thing, Kirsten, I think that's great about projects that are brand new, even though they do take a long time. We are providing at least 30 years of affordability. In the case of the YWCA, it's 60 years of affordability and probably much longer. So I do think that there's some advantages of waiting, because the length of affordability is usually much longer.
Some of our attendees had asked about statistics and websites that have been mentioned, and we will be sure to circle back to each of you afterwards to capture those and send that out in a follow-up. Stacy, you talked a little bit about the American Rescue Plan Act funds and the ability to allow us to do some really incredible things, like Deronda talked about the hotel. But with ARPA and similar COVID-related funding going away, our attendee wants to know, how is the local government planning to fill the gap that will open up after these funds disappear?
Well, that's a great question. the American Rescue Plan Act funds, just like the CARES Act dollars originally, do have an expiration date. I believe it's December 2026 that everything has to be expended. A lot of the projects, not all, but many of the projects that the county has funded have been projects that are kind of one-time funding. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we're doing in affordable housing that will be more for capital and investment. The money that we provided to the Salvation Army was a one-time purchase for that hotel, right? So there's a number of things that are being funded that in general are one-time as far as the affordable housing pieces. That is a concern. I think that's a concern that our community is going to have to grapple with when these funds end. What will happen next? One of the things that all of the agencies are asked when they apply for funding from the county is, how will you sustain this if in fact there is a need to sustain funding? So I think that's something that our community will need to monitor as we get closer to see whether or not what we're doing has an end date, or whether or not there will be additional funding, whether it's from local government, from private foundations going forward.
Deronda, would you add anything to that, or are we good to
Yeah.
jump to the next question?
Did I look like I wanted to add something? Because I did.
I thought so.
I did. Great question. The other thing I really wanted to add, though, was in this last round of opera dollars, we actually got funding from the county to build on to our current shelter. And so we're going to build another wing, or a wing onto the Center of Hope, that will really serve some of our citizens that are harder to serve, that won't come to the shelter. They would probably prefer to sleep outside, or some of the more we have several people now, several seniors. And so we are investing that money well, right? Because we'll get that building built. One of the things that we'll have to grapple with as an organization is that we did ask for operational dollars. So that question made sense. So we are now, we've added that to our fundraising plan to be able to sustain it. I just wanted to add that, but I really wanted to talk about us adding on to the building. And with that new addition, we'll be able to serve about 75 more people here at the shelter.
That's wonderful. And, you know, a couple of our attendees, there's sort of a theme going on with folks expressing being disheartened, with Charlotte being very proud of our growth and bragging about it, but the growth leaves some people behind. Another person mentioned, you know, how do we solve the affordable housing crisis without tamping down this natural growth of the city? And I think that's a philosophical question that I'd love to throw to all three of you, so that you can express your views on how we can have both and, if that's possible.
Both and is hard. I think that we're not going to change the trajectory of the city's growth pattern. We're just too attractive of a city, and we have too many strong, you know, business and economic drivers right now. So unfortunately, we're just going to, it depends on, again, when you talk about philosophical, it's like, do you believe in supply side economics? The more the supply that you build, or is it going to trickle down into affordability for some of the properties that might be a little bit older? We have not seen that.
Yeah.
You know, the truth is the investors are snapping those up, and they're, you know, increasing rents by 30 to 50% the minute that they buy them. So I do think that it is going to have to be methodical. You know, we're going to have to work on it case by case, property by property, and there is no easy solution, Kirsten.
Stacy, Deronda?
I'm thinking, but I agree with Julie that I don't think that we're going to tamp down the growth that we have here in Charlotte, right? It is an attractive city, and we want it to be. I do think that we're going to have to be methodical in how we approach housing and affordable housing going forward. And I am interested in seeing with the new Uniform Development Ordinance, UDO, that to see what's going to happen with that, what influence it's going to have as we continue to look at building affordable housing going forward. Because the thing is we don't have enough housing, and we don't have enough then the prices will rise and we'll continue to have it, right? There'll continue to be less affordable units. So I wish I had an answer, but I think that the fact that you're having this session today and the fact that you have so many participants, I think people understand this is a huge issue in our city. And we really need to be strategic and intentional with all the decisions that we're making, whether we're local government or whether we're nonprofits, because we're kind of at this point of inflection. What are we going to do? We know the issue. Are we going to invest the resources? Are we going to look at policy change? Are we going to follow through with what we've said? I think that's kind of where we're at today.
Thank you,
And, you know,
Stacy.
Yeah, it's such a personal thing for me, being from this city and, being a baby boomer as well, and having friends and family from the city that don't, have a challenging time sometimes with even connecting with the city. Like, is this a city that I grew up in, right? Like the city is not really preparing for me. And I think, but on the other hand, we know that growth is good. So it is a philosophical, it's a very complex challenge. I think, though, just sort of echoing what Julie and Stacy said, and especially Stacy, at least we're having a conversation. It is something that people care about. I always look at what are other cities doing, like what's happening across the country. And this is not just a Charlotte issue. Like the entire conversation we had today is not just a Charlotte issue. This is a national issue. The affordable housing and growth in a lot of cities anyway. So just trying to always look and see what other people are doing. And I have not seen, I have to be honest, any city that I'm impressed with to say they have the solution and the answer. So we just got to keep caring about it. How about that?
I think you're right. And to your point, Deronda, it isn't just a Charlotte issue. It's also not just a national issue. We had a visit a few years ago from our friends at the YWCA of Calgary, who were repurposing their land to build affordable housing because all the people that provide the service work can't afford to live there. I will say, before I hand it back to Jamila to wrap us up, that we're really excited about our future project with DreamKey Partners, and we have just held hands and kept walking forward despite COVID, despite escalations in costs, supply chain issues, labor shortages. But one of the things that it has done is, as we thought about reimagining how we might use the land that was given to us in the early 60s, we hoped it would inspire others. And we've certainly been inspired by seeing what people like St. Paul Baptist has done with their land, and seeing what other congregations have done with land. And I've had no less than 5 houses of worship send people over to talk about what they might do with their piece of land, because as we always say, they're not making any more land and it's not getting any cheaper. So I will say part of your advocacy can be talking with folks that have surplus land or who own, that can not just be new construction, but it could be about the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. People have a philosophical choice to make. And in a capitalist society, you can always make the choice to sell it for a profit. And if that's your choice, that's your choice, and we probably can't stop you. But if people can be educated